Welcome back to the Skift Travel Podcast. I'm Skift's editor-in-chief, Sarah Kopit, joined as always by Seth Borko, Skift's head of research. Hey Seth, how you doing?
Hey Sarah, how's it going?
Good. I'm hot. It's hot here.
It's summer, all right. Summer travel season and
It is
summer heat season is here.
summer heat here in the East Coast. All right, so today we are happy to welcome back Skift's intrepid airline reporter, Meghna Maharishi, to the program where we are going to tackle the question that she posed in a headline of her latest article on Skift. Where are the women in aviation? Hey, Meghna, welcome back. How you doing?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. So let us jump right in. You've been covering the aviation world for a while now. And when I talk to other reporters about their writing process, I always love to know where the seed of the story came from. Do you remember with this one, what inspired you to write this particular article?
Yeah, so I think for me, when I started thinking about the gender gap in the airline industry was when I started listening to a lot of earnings calls like every single quarter. It was just like, all the people that were talking were all men, with the exception of JetBlue, I think having two women in their C-suite, but everybody else was a man. And I think
Yeah.
even among the analyst Q&A, it was mostly men. There were like a few women there, but vast majority men. And then also every other industry event I went to, I think I was like one of like very few women there. And I was also like always like one of the younger people there too. So I
Yeah.
think just seeing that firsthand, I started kind of wondering like, oh, like how come this doesn't attract that many women to pursue like careers in this industry? Like what is the barrier there? And I guess like I think the industry has like an interesting history with gender, just considering with like flight attendants and back in the golden age
Yeah.
of flying, who would get to become a flight attendant and that sort of thing. So I just kind of got interested in seeing like
Yeah.
how that gap has evolved.
It's funny when I was in high school, I remember they were doing like some sort of career day at my high school and they had a pilot come in. It was one of my, classmates' dads and I walked in and he asked me the exact same question that was the opening line to your piece. He says, "Oh, so you want to be a flight attendant?" And I hadn't really considered one way or the other. I was just thought it was kind of cool. I wanted to go and listen to him talk about being a pilot. But even way back then, and even, my 17-year-old self, I was, nothing against flight attendants. It was just the assumption, right?
Yeah.
Like that assumption is just the thing that it's pervasive. I mean, it hasn't gotten better in 30 years, as was borne out by your reporting, Magda.
Yeah, and Meghna, I'm a numbers guy. I love the statistics. I think it doesn't take a degree in statistics to look around the airline industry and see that there's
Yeah.
not that many women. But I am curious, as you were diving into your reporting, you know, what were the numbers really show? How, were they? I mean, I assume they were everywhere near as bad as we expect they were. But what did they show?
So from what I found was that the majority of women in the industry were basically flight attendants. Around 80% of flight attendants are women. And then among pilots, I believe it's now 8% are women. And that number has actually gotten a lot better in the last few years. So the 8% number
Mm.
is a pretty big increase because there's just been more efforts in the industry to recruit women and other underrepresented people into those roles.
I
And
mean,
then I
that's
think,
a
yeah,
full order of magnitude, 8% to 80%. It's a full order of magnitude in the most proper sense of that term. That's crazy.
yeah. And I think also just looking at the gender gap on the corporate side, it's a little bit more unclear since it kind of those job titles all get kind of like meshed into one across all industries.
Yeah.
But even among like CEOs, I think in aviation, that number is around 3% based off of a 2022 report. And it hasn't really gotten that much better. I mean, JetBlue just recently got a new CEO who's like the first female CEO of a major US airline, but
Yeah.
it's just been such slow improvement.
Yeah. So did what did you find about the reasons why? Like why is aviation so bad? Because I think just like Seth said, it doesn't take a master's in statistics to look around, panels or like when you're on like LinkedIn. It just it is oddly one of the most male dominated parts of the travel industry. Did you get any clarity as to why?
Yeah, so there are a couple reasons why, based off of all the people that I spoke to. One of the reasons is that most people, when they think of aviation, they think you can only be a pilot or a flight attendant, and they don't think about the many other roles in the industry that you can do. And I think
Yeah,
also to be a pilot or a flight attendant, it takes a certain type of person to do that. They're both pretty physically demanding jobs and they do require a lot of training. So that's one reason. And I think the other thing, and this is the bigger reason, and this is also what makes, I think, aviation very unique compared to a lot of other industries, is that a lot of the executives in this industry have loved planes since they were kids. I think in
mm,
any other industry, maybe you start getting interested in it when you're in college or maybe at some other point in your career. But with aviation, it seems to start right when you're a kid. And
yeah,
with a lot of with
So
women, when they're girls, they're not necessarily looking up to pilots or like playing with model planes or things like that. And I think someone that at IATA that I spoke to said that basically boys get like a 10-year head start just because they're
mm,
typically interested in it from when they're like a little kid, and women are constantly playing catch up to them then when they do get into the industry.
as with so
yeah,
many gendered things, it comes down to the toy companies, it comes down to Mattel
yeah.
Yeah.
and the
I was
producing.
gonna say Barbie.
Yeah,
This, I
Barbie
mean,
versus
like this, yeah, I'm having flashbacks to Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling
does
talking, like almost having this
yeah
like a very similar conversation, right? We're
does
just like them, Seth,
yeah,
Margot
that's right.
Robbie
That's
and
right. Yeah,
Ryan Gosling.
I'm certainly certainly no Ken, certainly no Ken for me. But maybe one day.
And it probably has something to do with STEM too, Meghna, I would guess, like on a lot of the technical aviation front, just the lag that, women and girls have in STEM related fields. I know that's getting a lot better, but I would assume that also perhaps has something to do with the pipeline problem anyway.
The STEM part of that is interesting because I think across the board, the number of women in STEM and the number of women in engineering programs has been
Yeah.
increasing by a lot. I think at a lot of colleges and their engineering schools, it's mostly a 50-50 split now.
Oh,
But I think
wow.
yeah, but at least when I was in college, I know our engineering school was basically around 50% women, 50% men, which I used to
Yeah.
think was pretty impressive at the time. But I think
Yeah.
this is also just like a broader issue with aviation and aerospace, is that that industry has generally had trouble recruiting young people out of top schools. And that's been an issue for a while now. But then given that that's like a general issue, it also trickles down to also having trouble to in like recruiting women. The dean of Purdue's aerospace engineering program, when I spoke to him, he said a lot of women tend to opt for other fields like biomedical engineering, aerospace engineering, like nuclear, mechanical engineering. Those
Yeah.
all have some of the lowest percentages of women
Yeah.
in those
So
majors.
Hmm.
aviation is almost in this tough spot where it's in the STEMish field, but it doesn't pay as well as biomechanical engineering. Is that like sort of what, or nuclear engineering is maybe what you're saying?
Nuclear engineering also is mostly men, but biomedical engineering, environmental engineering, those actually have a lot of women in them. And I think the
Okay.
pay is one part. I think also there's just like a big lack of awareness. And the dean of Purdue that I was speaking to, he also said that sometimes it's also hard to see what the impact of what you're doing is in aviation, maybe compared to biomedical engineering. Like maybe it's hard to see like what is so important about helping engineer a commercial airplane versus maybe making a big medical breakthrough that you might feel like has a more direct impact. He was saying like that plays into it too. And I think also just given the general problem that they have with recruiting young people, it also doesn't help when you see a lot of like bad news about the big
Mm,
aerospace manufacturers as well, which also tends to turn people away.
On
yeah.
the recruiting side, we're talking about aerospace now, so Boeing and the manufacturers.
Mhm.
Is the is the military still a big recruiting pipeline for pilots, and is that a part of the gender gap as well?
So I didn't get too into the military part, but I do know, and as far as becoming a pilot, the military tends to be the easiest way. I do know, however, that airlines have been making just like bigger strides to recruit even more women out of those military programs to be commercial pilots. Quite a few big US airlines have sort of started these DEI initiatives like since the pandemic to get more women and people of color into pilot roles, for example. And I think like those efforts have been working since the number of female pilots has actually increased pretty dramatically in the past 4 years or so.
And I think you have profiled in your article some pretty incredible, women in aviation. So I think you're talking about like Juliana Ramirez, Julie Rempel. I mean, there are women building really impressive careers for themselves in aviation. I mean, what are their experience? What did they tell you about their experiences in the sector?
Yeah, so at least with the women that I spoke to, a lot of them told me that they've had pretty positive experiences and that they've had mentors who've really advocated for them and have really championed for their growth in the workplace. And that's been a big part of the reason why they've been able to move up. I think also another big part that I heard from a lot of these women is just also like learning to kind of tune out a lot of the noise and just sort of ignoring the little things, like maybe when you're not acknowledged as like at a meeting, or like maybe you're like the only woman in the room, and just sort of being able to tune out those things has also been what's helped them. But I think there is also a bit of a flip side to it. Some women have told me that whenever they tell anybody they meet that they work for an airline, they ask if they're a flight attendant, for example. Or some have also said it's also really difficult to juggle having a kid and then also have a demanding corporate job. Or even one of the pilots that I spoke to, she said that she's been putting off having a family just because her schedule as a pilot is so busy right now. So that's still something that she's figuring out.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, so you brought up mentors. I like just in my own career, I've had some amazing mentors and some amazing what I call champions. Not my term, but just this idea that when you're really in a group that is male dominated, you have to have like as a young woman, you're not going to get to be in those the rooms where the decisions are being made. And so maybe your female mentors aren't either. So this idea of having champions or male allies who are there talking about you in that room that you haven't been able to get into yet, so someday, so that you will be, that has been really, I think, important for me and something that I recognized early on. So I'm curious if you could talk a little more about that, and about, for in the places where we are making progress for gender diversity, like how some of those steps happened, how some of those experiences and careers were built, what was going right, I guess.
I think having that option of mentorship is obviously one part of it. A lot of the women that I spoke to, a lot of them said that they had male mentors in the workplace that were just true advocates for them, and that helped them
Yeah.
significantly. So that's been one thing. I know that there have been a lot of just like industry wide recruiting pushes to get just more women to join. I know airlines have been looking to recruit more at colleges and to get more engineers on board, for example. So that's also been a really big part of it. SkyTeam is also doing this initiative to help more women on the more corporate side of the industry kind of come up and get promoted into more senior positions. And they were telling me that a part of that is also just sort of teaching them like the soft skills and the workplace that would allow them to get up to those positions too. And I think also providing mentorship, not just from men, but also like women in a lot of those positions too, because I do think that
Yeah.
it helps to have mentors who also do look like you or can relate to a little bit too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks, Meghna. We are going to go to a break right now, and we will be back and talk some more on the other side.
Welcome back to the Skift Travel Podcast. As always, I'm joined by Sarah Kopit, and we're continuing our conversations with Meghna about women in aviation. So, Meghna, we spent the first half of this podcast kind of discussing some of the challenges with getting more women into the aviation industry, why it's happened, those sort of things. I would love to get a little more specific though. Maybe name some names, right? There's not that many major airline employers in the United States. Who do you think is doing a really good job of this? And is there anyone who maybe needs to kind of needs a little pressure to step up their game a little bit?
I say, I guess, at least in the US, I would say that JetBlue has probably done the best job. They are known for having just a lot of gender representation at the top levels, even before they had a new CEO. They've just always been known for that. Even when I was talking to IATA, they also highlighted all the work that JetBlue has done. And I think that's just been one of the things that's like made them stand out in the industry, at least in the US. As far as who could be doing better, I guess you could probably say all the other airlines. A lot of them, I mean, like a lot of them have like a pretty similar gender makeup, and a lot of them at the top C-suite levels, the people that have the chief in their title, um, it's all like predominantly like men. There are really not that many
Yeah.
women. Otherwise, you might be able to count them on like a single hand
Yeah.
if you maybe exclude
Yeah.
JetBlue. So I'd say they could
So
probably all be
what
doing a better job.
So what so when you talk to JetBlue, like what is it that JetBlue is doing? Like let's even like drill down a little bit more. Like what are the initiatives that that company or like why do you think they are having an easier time recruiting candidates that are diverse than basically, as you said, everyone else?
So JetBlue would not talk to me for this story when I reached out to them about that. But from what IATA told me, that that's just been like a really big part, I think, of their mission as an airline, and I believe like their head of HR has just also been really big on those DEI initiatives, and I believe it's just paid off really well for JetBlue. It's
Yeah,
unfortunate that they couldn't talk to me more about this, but that was what I got from IATA
yeah.
at least on
We're,
this.
I mean, I didn't report the story. I'm just speculating here, but I wonder how much of it is also a momentum thing because we were just having that
Yeah.
conversation about mentorship, about having representation in the room. Once the ball gets rolling, it's probably a lot. Like I think getting the ball rolling is probably the hardest part. Maybe I don't know.
I think you're right, Seth. I think that it is a bit of a snowball effect when you start kind of opening the doors to new and different people, ideas, initiatives, all that good stuff that has happened in the last what, like 50, 60 years. Across the world and in the United States. So, yeah, I mean, if it's really is a cultural thing, I think, having a lot of these programs and stuff. So, I mean, and another thing I did want, you reported this a lot, Meghna, and we did, and I think that we would be remiss to not talk about it, but this kind of motherhood penalty, being a pilot, and that's not the only job, as you noted, in aviation, but there are corporate all sorts of jobs at an airline. But what did you find the that the motherhood penalty had to do specific with aviation?
So, some of the women that I spoke to who were also moms said that they sometimes felt as if there was a negative connotation in the workplace because around them because they had responsibilities at home as well. And I think
Yeah,
that sort of feeling weighed down on them a lot. None of them said they were ever really truly like penalized, like they were not demoted or experienced any pay cuts or anything like that because they had kids. But I think just that feeling where, oh, like now another part of your identity is the fact that you're a mom and that you have to do all these other things outside of your job
Yeah.
too, sort of plays into how they're perceived in the workplace. And then
Yeah.
one of the other women that I spoke to who used to be the chief commercial officer at United, she said as a new mom, she couldn't even imagine having to balance having a C-suite job and then also being a mother, just because both sort of expect you to be on call all the time. And it is a lot to juggle. And but then she also said on the other hand that now if she was looking to hire someone, she would look at moms a lot more because she didn't realize how capable they were of things like time management until she became
Yes.
one.
Yes. Are you kidding me? Mothers know how to get done and by 4 p.m. Like, absolutely. I don't know if I can say that on the podcast, Jose. I think I can. You can probably bleep it out if I can't. But yes, absolutely. 1,000 times yes. I have 2 kids. They're a little bit older now. All right. So kind of like wrapping all of this up, I'm curious, like, Meghna, did you get any sense of kind of like, well, if I were in charge, this is what I would do, or things that, like if you could pull like things that are going right from a lot of different sources, like how can the industry do better? I mean, obviously it can, it will. What do you think that looks like?
So some of the recruiting pushes that the industry has already been doing, like IATA's 25 by 25, I think has been actually pretty effective. It has motivated airlines to hire more women in certain positions or to promote more women into certain positions. And I think being able to maintain that momentum even after this push ends in 2025 would be really good for the industry, just because otherwise like it will take years and years and years to really close that gender gap. And a lot of it also just starts at the bottom and like right out of college. So I think another thing that I gather that the industry could be doing more is just raising more awareness at colleges across the country, or even in like master's programs or MBA programs even as well, to get more women into those corporate roles or into those engineering roles, because more and more women are going to college. They are now outnumbering men enrolled in college, and a lot of women are pursuing careers in STEM, and that gender gap generally in STEM is closing. But I do think that the aviation industry really struggles with like an awareness issue. So it's really just about raising that awareness, like at like the at the I guess like low at like right when you're out of school. Sorry about that, but basically right when you're out
Yeah,
of school, because otherwise like they're going to constantly have this problem and it's just not going to get better. I mean, I can even attest to the fact that like when I was in college, I will say I don't think anybody in the aviation industry was a major recruiter at my school. I think
right.
maybe Boeing was, but I don't think I ever heard of anybody in my college like starting a job at like an airline or anything like that. So that awareness thing I think is just a really big component of it.
Well, and I think what you're
Yeah,
saying there is so important because the reality is the aviation industry is facing recruitment issues. Like, forget take
across the
gender out of
board,
the yeah,
right?
take gender out of the equation.
Yeah,
Hard to hire
yeah,
pilots, hard to hire executives, hard to hire engineers. And so what I think I'm hearing you say is that like the solution to the gender gap in aviation is also in many ways the solution to just the employment problems in aviation in terms of awareness and
yeah.
yeah,
We wrote a megatrend about that.
yeah,
I mean, it was kind of about supply chain, but part of that supply chain was people. They just pilots, aircraft, air traffic controllers. Like that's in a great way to get more people to into your industry is to look to underrepresented groups,
yeah. To look at the
and
other
money doesn't
50%
hurt
of the
either.
workforce that you haven't looked at for the last 50
Yeah,
years.
Yeah.
exactly, exactly.
And I will say to the aviation industry's credit, I know that there's been some reporting out there that a lot of other companies have been cutting back on DEI policies or like not putting them on their 10Ks and everything like that. I will say in aviation, that doesn't seem like it's been the case, at least with all the major airlines in the US. It seems as if there is still a commitment to hiring a more diverse set of people. So I think also if they're able to maintain that commitment, I think at least like years down the road, that would help at, by closing the gender gap at least a little bit.
Well, I'm glad to hear that the airline industry is doing better than others who are falling back into old ways. I think the airline industry certainly needs these initiatives to continue to grow. And Meghna, I know if they slip up, you'll hold them accountable in your next feature story. So, for our final segment of this podcast, we're going to be answering your audience questions. As a reminder, podcast@skift.com. That's the email address to have your questions answered on our Skift Travel podcast. We got a bunch of interesting questions, and we've kind of curated them specifically for airline related so that we could ask Meghna some questions while we've got her on the show. First, a little bit of a newsy bit, but Southwest Airlines made a lot of news. Elliott investors. So we had someone ask about what this activist Elliott stake in Southwest means. Meghna, this is right up your beat. What's going on?
So Elliott took up a nearly $2 billion stake in Southwest, which now makes them one of Southwest's largest investors. So they hold a bit of leverage over the airline. And the biggest thing they've been wanting with that stake is for a leadership change. They want a new CEO and they want a new chairman. They're not too concerned about the nitty gritty details of what Southwest strategy should be, but they really just want the leadership change. And this is just coming from what they view as Southwest's underperformance in the past year or so. So far in 2024, Southwest has not made a profit, and they've been pretty badly affected by Boeing 737 MAX 7 delays, and they've also been affected by high labor costs and also just the current demand environment. A lot of people are still wanting to fly premium and they're still wanting to fly international. Southwest doesn't have either of those things, so that just hasn't been faring too well for them. But Southwest executives have been talking about potentially making some changes to their business model, like adding premium cabins and also doing away with the open boarding process. And if they were to make those changes, that they would be some of the biggest changes in Southwest's history as an airline. So that's been on the cards, but it's really unclear to see, even if Southwest does make those changes, if it will even like shoo away the activist pressure from Elliott, just because Elliott does have a reputation of doing whatever it can to get what it wants.
Those are
So
the folks that famously tried to impound an Argentinian warship. So if I was Bob Jordan, the CEO of Southwest Airlines, I wouldn't want them coming for my head.
exactly. And he said he doesn't plan to resign. And so far, Southwest has been like, oh, we're open to having a dialogue with them. We're very confident in our current strategy and everything, but we'll see where it goes. Elliott has been pretty effective with its past activist stakes that it's taken up in other companies and other industries, or I guess other countries too with
Yeah, other
Argentina.
countries as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see where that goes. I would say it's probably not going to look good for Southwest, and I would expect it to get ugly in the months to come. I'm not sure if they'll try to do anything before their investor day in September.
And
All right, so stay tuned with that one. Okay, next question is about summer storms, summer delays, summer travel, and summer heat. So, are all of these things going to impact travelers this summer? And what are all of the things that may or may not have to happen in order for all of us to get wherever we want to go on vacation unscathed?
Heat and weather are probably going to be the two biggest things that cause delays. I think as far as airlines go in terms of their operations, they've definitely gotten a lot better at being able to handle all that post-pandemic demand. So on the operational side, I think things would be fine for the summer. I think even again, like summer travel, it's expected to rise again this year, and airlines seem pretty prepared on that front. But again, like heat waves are a really big thing, and so can like bad weather be. And I think also the other thing, at least in the New York area, is the fact that the airports here are slot constrained right now too. So that combined with bad
Mm.
weather can create for more delays, but those are not really at the fault of the airlines. As far as heat goes, that can create delays because it can get too hot for an aircraft to fly, and also the tarmacs can melt too in very hot weather. We've seen like those issues in the past couple of years, like when Europe had a really bad heat wave, for example, that caused a lot of flight delays. So I think the biggest thing would be to keep an eye out for that, and when you're planning your trips, to perhaps take those things into account, and to also have a backup plan if your flight does get disrupted from bad weather or a really crazy heat wave.
And I liked what you're saying
Yeah.
about the New York airspace being slot constrained because they can't hire air traffic controllers. So even this audience question ties back to the topic of the day of how do you hire and build more effective workforces? It is all related. Your summer travel delays are linked to, hiring and staffing at these organizations and their ability across the ecosystem to get top quality talent. Uh, well, I think we can end it there, right? I think that was a great podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, Meghna. I really, really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
And if you have further questions you want us to answer on the next podcast, just a reminder, the question inbox is podcasts@skift.com. We look forward to hearing you and look forward to having you join us again next week. Thanks.